Hold on, I'm waiting on my kid to walk by and stomp by.
Is that what that was?
God, let me add this in a minute. I'm typing it every time one of my family causes so much noise. Oh God, that's terrible. My son's walking back and forth trying to lurk around, get food, and he's making so much noise. He keeps walking over. I'm like, I told you I was going to record. Don't go away, please.
Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Well, welcome everyone to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast where we break down and celebrate the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. I'm one of your hosts, Alan Sanders.
And I'm Walt Murray, your other host.
And joining us today, we have a host from Minute Impossible. We've got Jonathan Howell. Jonathan, welcome to our podcast.
Hey, thanks, guys. Glad to be here.
Great to have you joining us as well and bringing some of your insight. You've got several more episodes under your belt since this is our inaugural season, but we are really happy to be part of this and looking forward to having some fun with this inaugural season of Young Frankenstein.
Oh, yeah, it's a great series. I'm really excited. When you guys announced this, I was like, oh, man, Gene Wilder movies, this is perfect. I love it.
Well, we thought it'd be something different than doing a typical franchise of, let's say, because obviously some of the big ones were already taken, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Mission Impossible, but we were thinking, well, you know what, why not make it instead pick an actor rather than an entire franchise?
Yeah, that gives you guys a very unique perspective where you can jump around in time and actually see him grow as an actor or as a director or as a writer. I mean, he did everything, so why not?
And there are some other great actors that come in, and of course the writing and the producing staff that have worked with him. It is just a never-ending pool of great talent that we get to look at.
Yeah, definitely the golden age. Well, it's not considered the golden age of movies, but I consider it my golden age of movies. These are all the movies that shaped the way I laugh at things and the way the way I see comedy is these kind of jokes. Mel Brooks jokes is what I grew up on. So, and Gene Wilder jokes.
Well, before we get into this particular minute, since you're joining us for the first time today here, what was your initial thoughts of Young Frankenstein growing up? Since you said some of these movies were some of your formative years for comedy and film, do you have your first remembrance of what it was like to have sat through Young Frankenstein?
Yeah, I was thinking about this beforehand. When I was a kid, I saw Blazing Saddles first, which is probably the most, the dirtier of the two. I saw that with I definitely saw it with my dad. My dad would have had me watch this. I was probably 10 or 11, probably way too young to have seen that movie. But I remember saying, man, who is this guy? And he's like, that's Gene Wilder. I'm like, well, he's hilarious. And then he goes, well, there are more movies. It's like, I'm a father too. And, when you finally get your kid to latch onto something that you like, he was like, oh, wait until we see Young Frankenstein. I go, oh, is it like Frankenstein? He goes, yeah, but it's like funny Frankenstein. I go, oh, fantastic. So I remember as a kid seeing it. At first I was like, it's going to be in black and white. That's when I thought black and white movies were gross and didn't want to watch them. But it was definitely a moment when I learned the subtle joke, because Blazing Saddles is a ton of puns, a ton of wordplay, and a lot of what people consider like the Mel Brooks trope, the Mel Brooks way of designing. And Young Frankenstein for me was a lot more subtle. It was a lot more, and I think that's Gene Wilder's hand in being part of the screenwriting crew on this. He brought a better story. I think it got to play with a lot more genre that I was used to, which was old horror movies and Frankenstein movies. And he also created a movie that without the gags would be a good horror movie. The gags just make it my kind of horror movie that I would rather want to watch as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old. So I think I actually grew to like this movie more than I liked Blazing Saddles as the years went on. As I got older, I started to appreciate this movie more.
And that's a conversation we had even deciding what movie to do first. And we actually debated Gene Wilder's, what I would argue, his big three: Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, or Willy Wonka. I felt like Willy Wonka is so big, and I wanted to kind of hold off on that. And Walt loved Young Frankenstein, which I do too. And we thought maybe Blazing Saddles in our current climate, maybe that's when you push back a couple of episodes, build your audience, because if you just stumble on Blazing Saddles for the first time, you might not understand the context of that film and what it was trying to do. So many people get offended so easily. We decided, maybe Young Frankenstein's the better one to cut our teeth on.
Yeah, I think that Blazing Saddles is more subversive in its comedy, and I think that, it definitely would have gotten you more people going, oh, really? We started with this one? Okay. There's a lot in that movie that we don't even want to say on a PG podcast. And two, it's hard to talk about something you can't say. And so I definitely understand that. So good choice. Good choice.
Well, and I think Young Frankenstein's a good introduction to Gene Wilder, too, because you get to see how he does comedy. There's the very subtle jokes, there are the over-the-top jokes, but the facial expressions, and we'll even see the other actors pulling the same thing with the facial expressions and stuff like that. So I think this is a great movie to start with.
Well, let's go ahead and dive into this minute. We're here with minute 16, which actually starts off with the remainder of a joke that we told you about on Friday. That was a tie-in to a Glenn Miller song that was then popularized by the Andrews Sisters, 1941, where we start off with the kid basically saying, "Can I give you a shine?" It's the wrap-up of where we were at the very tail end of minute 15, and ends with, "I see," as Igor and Dr. Frankenstein are on the platform having their first conversation. So let's talk about this joke for a minute. Let's remind everybody. Last week, Walt, you and I chatted about it. It measures meter for meter, syllable for syllable. Instead of, "Pardon me, boy, is this the Chattanooga choo-choo?" It's, "Pardon me, boy, is this the Transylvania station?" And he says, yeah, track 29, and then stops, pauses, and then we come to this minute. "Can I give you a shine?" Which is, Jonathan, exactly what the first four lines of the lyrics from Glenn Miller's and the Andrews Sisters' Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Yeah, this song, I did my notes. I'm glad you guys talked about it last week, the part that you talked about. When I was looking it up, I couldn't remember. I was like, of course I know this song, and I know the Andrews Sisters did it, but I couldn't remember if this was from a movie, so I went looking. This is actually from a movie. I found it's from a movie called Sun Valley Serenade. Sun Valley is in, I forget where, it's a skiing resort. So you're going to have to help me with why Chattanooga Choo Choo was put in this movie. I don't know. that I didn't get into the actual minutia of why, but it's from 1941, and to this day, Sun Valley, where this movie took place, they have a dedicated cable channel that shows this movie 24 hours a day and plays and has this song playing all the time.
You are kidding.
No.
That is crazy.
So Sun Valley, that's Idaho Resort.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, one of the things we tried to struggle with, this movie came out in 1974. And when our parents would have been our ages, this song would have only been about 30 years removed from when it was first introduced. So it was probably a lot more in their minds. I knew my mom and dad growing up, they loved the Glenn Miller Orchestra. They loved big bands. They remembered going to dances and things like that. So I don't think that the music would have been as far removed from them. I think this is one of those jokes that because of our generation, we're even 30, actually we're 40 years beyond that. Maybe that's why it doesn't ring as true for us right now. But for our parents, they would have gotten it very easily.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I actually talked to my dad about this joke this week. I explained the context of the joke, and he's in his mid-70s, and I said, would you have gotten what this was? He goes, "Oh, yeah, that's the Pardon Me Boys, is the Chattanooga Choo Choo." And he said that was one of those songs that kind of permeated the culture when he was growing up. He was born during World War II, so as he was growing up through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, he said you absolutely would have known exactly what that was.
It's weird when you think about this was from 74 and this song was from 41. This is a 30-year-old bit, 33-year-old bit that he's putting in a movie. And we're still to this day get it. I was like, when you think about it that way, this isn't a movie from the 80s. This isn't a movie from the 90s. This is a movie that is making a reference to a 30-year-old song in 1974. It's ancient.
So, Jonathan, when you saw this, did you get that that's what that was? Because I'd said last week.
Probably, because I was a 10-year-old kid from the South. I'm from Tennessee, so Chattanooga is important. So anything with Tennessee involved in it, everybody's like, "Oh, look."
And did you catch when you were watching Young Frankenstein that was a reference to that song?
Yeah, definitely.
That's interesting.
I don't remember it, but I also, when I rewatch it, don't remember not getting it. There are definitely some jokes in Blazing Saddles that you'll go back and watch and go, I have no idea what they're talking about. Like they're referencing something that happened, some current event of the time. But yeah, I guess with music, it's easier to have a shelf life. And yeah, it's funny when this joke, I'm sure this joke played well to my parents. And I'm sure my dad also laughed when I watched it with him. So I would have thought, oh, that's cute. They used the Chattanooga Choo Choo line.
Well, the thing here that we want to roll into is obviously he's been on this train. We have this little bit with the kid and the shoeshine boy. Well, we talked about this last week. It's late. I guess this kid works the midnight to 8 a.m. shift?
I guess so. Yeah, he's got the overnight shoeshine table shift. I don't know who he pissed off, but...
How did you draw the short straw?
Also, where's he going with that shoeshine box? He goes in the door of what? Why? Where's he going? Does he live in the station?
It's like the caddy shack for for Shoeshine
Hey,
Boys.
maybe that's it. Maybe he's just finished his shift and he's like going inside. He lives in the back, he's got like the little corner, little bunk kind of in the side there.
Maybe his dad is the conductor for the Transylvania station.
Could very well be. He's coming home, kids coming home, meeting mom and dad, saying, maybe one last chance. Give a guy a shine. Maybe make a couple of quarters.
I wonder if there's a medieval shoeshine expert that we could call on to come in and explain this to us.
Yeah, this is a weird, it's funny because in this movie they're trying to make Transylvania look like the 1800s. Everything, of course, in 1900s would be in the 1800s then, that sort of thing. The joke is, did they give shoe shines in the Middle Ages? Yeah,
well, that's a good question.
Are we saying this is Middle Ages, or are we saying this is what Transylvania are we in?
The thing we've talked about, which I think is an interesting thing that happens almost spontaneously in the background, we start off, now granted, the movie to us looks dated because it's 1974 when it was released, but we start the film in a classroom with modern dress, modern kids in a modern setting, and in the first basically 10 to 12 minutes of this movie, we have slowly, with each successive train ride and each successive scene, we are now all of a sudden transported at the very least to the Universal Pictures 1931 Frankenstein, which is what they were shooting for in terms of the style of film. In fact, there's a story, Jonathan, where the cinematographer, apparently Mel Brooks forgot to let him know they were trying to mirror the Universal Monster Picture style, and so their first dailies, the guys were like, this doesn't look like Frankenstein, and the guy's like, oh, you want this to look like Frankenstein, like the 31 Frankenstein. And so they made some adjustments with lighting and camera position, and a lot of wide shots then were added rather than a lot of close-ups. We do get some close-ups, but they really transport us. We feel suddenly, at the very least, we are in the Boris Karloff era now of Frankenstein.
It's funny that they, weren't on the same page when they started shooting this. That's what they were going for, even though we all now would look at this and go, yeah, it's all, going for the 30s style.
The kid, obviously, whether he goes inside, whether he's going to punch in or punch out, I don't know, if they've even got a time clock. We get a diamond wipe here, and what I found interesting is the sheer number of wipes used in this movie, from diagonal wipes to fade-ins to the cartoon almost like down to a pinhole, and then that pinhole opens back up. So a lot of interesting wipes here, and when we get this diamond wipe, we are now on the platform, Dr. Frankenstein left completely alone in a night that can't decide whether it's going to stay foggy or get cleared up.
It looks like a smoke bomb went off. I mean, it is really dense.
They shot this after they shot the principal photography, and they're like, let's put some fog in there, and they're like, oh, good Lord in heaven, what have we done? And they're like, well, we can't wait. This is what we got. It's not dissipating.
It's a cool shot as we are basically tracking away from Gene Wilder's character, and we see all this like dense fog rolling into the point where it's so thick, even when he goes up against the flame-lit gas lantern on the side of the building to try to check his watch, he literally is enveloped in smoke to the point where you can hardly make him out.
Well, I'm sure they were trying to have some sort of light atmospheric fog happening, and also the train's leaving, so steam would have pushed it out into the thing. So at some point they're actually trying to do both at the same time. But I'm sure they were like, oh God, we've done too much.
Yeah, it certainly. Although I am reminded, Walt, of when we last left Elizabeth on the platform. I mean, she was enveloped as that train left.
She's hacking and coughing.
Yeah, she was in a black cloud.
That must be the joke. In this universe, the trains just put off an insane amount of.
The trains are like the pyroclasmic flow of a volcanic eruption.
Yeah, because it's not even steam. I mean, this is smoke.
Yeah, exactly. It's dark smoke. Well, the funny part is, obviously, when we go in for a bit of a medium to close-up shot of Dr. Frankenstein, who's still kind of looking around trying to figure out what's going on, when we push in, there's like no smoke around him whatsoever.
No.
It's completely cleared up.
Yeah, he's walked out into a different world.
When I first heard this, and it's been a while since I'd watched this until we got ready for this project, when I heard it, I was thinking, is this like Long John Silver or somebody? Because it sounds like somebody like you hear a clump and then body dragging, and then a clump and then a body dragging sound. So it was really a creepy sound effect, knowing we don't know what's making that noise.
It is, and it is another one of these Mel Brooks, Gene Wilder curveballs that we're about to get thrown. But yeah, same thing. I mean, it is such a distinctive sound, and it's such an ominous noise coming towards you, and then you get this.
Jonathan, from your perspective, because this movie does walk that fine line back and forth, and you mentioned it earlier this minute, it could have been just kind of a throwback horror to the 30s, the style of Universal Pictures, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, Dracula kind of movies, but then it's got enough humor built in that we're always second-guessing. Is this going to be a scary moment, toward the horror line? When you were going back, rewatching this minute, and you heard that thump followed by the dragging sound, what were your initial thoughts?
It's funny, the sound design in this movie, I'm sure Mel Brooks told them, keep it straight. Like, I want horror movie sound effects. Like, in Blazing Saddles, there's some, like, I would consider hijinks music that comes up every once in a while for light stuff that reminds you, oh, this is a light movie and light things are going to happen. This movie, that never happens. You only get, like, the creaking of doors and the scary walking up, and then this freeze frame and music push in on our character who's about to walk up. Yeah, it's one of those things where I love it. I'm not going to be scared of a Mel Brooks movie, but I'm at least excited to see who's coming up. When I first saw it, I'm sure I was like, oh, who's coming? I don't know who's coming, is because in my mind I didn't know if the of course the joke would be to have Igor show up first, because if Dr. Frankenstein's there, then I want Igor to be the next person they meet. But at the time, probably as a child, I would not have thought of that. Comically, I would not think that would be the thing that was coming. So when it happened, I was probably like, oh, who's coming? Who's coming?
One of the things that I find, and I wonder if the folks that made The Princess Bride did this as an homage to this moment, because when you first hear the voice of what is eventually Igor, he doesn't sound anything like Igor speaks. You hear this, it's like this real guttural, and it almost reminds me in The Princess Bride where he's like, you are in the pit of despair, and it's because you don't expect, when you hear the voice off screen, it sounds almost monstrous.
This whole scene, once they push in and we see Gene Wilder and Igor, it feels like a reshoot or at least a hack job in editing. It's really all over the place. A lot of the shots are well created and well framed. This shot is like a low angle up to Frankenstein, and then he hears the voice and he looks actually at his own eye level, and then below him we then get a shot down toward Marty Feldman as Igor, and it's a weird shift in the way we're looking at the movie, and then also his voice is completely different. I kind of think maybe that was done in ADR later.
Very well could have been.
And he couldn't remember. As someone who does really bad impressions on our podcast, I forget between sessions what the one, if I'm doing one that recurs, I can't remember what it sounded like. So it's different every time. So it's mostly just bad planning. So I think this was just bad planning on their part. I think Marty Feldman couldn't remember what he did, and so in ADR he did. He's sitting quietly in a dark room watching this on the screen. He's like, "Hello," he's saying it like with a lot of affectation. Whereas on set, when they did this 2 months before, he was probably like, "Oh, hello," he was kind of more of himself. So.
Now, here's some of it. It actually bothers me, and I'm wondering, because a lot of the behind the scenes, the crew was cracking up so much. I know Cloris Leachman told stories of how she would get just angry, not mad to the point of like losing a friendship, but she would get irritated because Gene Wilder would break so much on stage. We've got this push in of Igor's face, but you can tell they have freeze framed it rather than just keeping it organically moving. And I couldn't figure out why they did that, other than maybe Mel Brooks wanted the push in, but did not have a take where people didn't break.
They wanted to put an organic push in where it's him, the camera's still rolling, but the camera's zoomed. But instead, they had to do it. Wouldn't be considered digital at that point. They had to actually, magnify.
Right. But you can tell they freeze the frame. Like there's no movement. There's nothing. It becomes a picture at that point, and we're doing the whole Ken Burns. We'll push in for motion as if it's like a documentary picture.
Yeah, and the only thing I could think is if they really sat down and planned it this way, is that they wanted to kind of emphasize how awkward Igor is, because he really is, and you get that freeze frame face of his with the eyes going everywhere and the crazy smile.
I know we're getting long in time, so I didn't want to jump on you're probably going to introduce Marty Feldman.
Oh, Jonathan, there is no I wish I could tell you we had a hard set rule for how things happen around here, but that would be going way overboard.
Well, then I want to talk about Marty Feldman. Marty Feldman plays Igor in this. You know him as the guy with the weird eyes. He was one of those actors that me as a kid kind of gravitated toward, because I was like, okay, he's the funny one. So he's always the one that's in these movies. And I had to go back, and I was trying to think, and I was like, I saw Marty Feldman in a movie, and it was about the French Foreign Legion, and I swear I cannot remember the name of this movie. I went back and found it. Here's my of the day. Here's my recommendation. If you're a Marty Feldman fan from him in this movie, go see the last remake of Bo Geist. It is a movie from 1977 where he and Michael York play twin brothers, already hilarious, because Michael York in 1977 was a beautiful human. They go into the French Foreign Legion and hijinks ensue, and it's a funny movie. Even the title of it, the last remake of Bogeist, this was obviously a movie that was remade a bunch of times because it was during a time when people were enamored with the French Foreign Legion, and that's my movie take of the day for Marty Feldman. It's a great movie. I remember it from when I was a kid. I might have seen it right after seeing this movie because I couldn't even remember the name of it.
Well, now that you mention it, I remember that movie and remember how crazy funny Marty Feldman was.
Well, see, the first thing I remember Marty Feldman in was another pairing of him and Gene Wilder, and that was Sherlock Holmes' Smarter Brother.
Right.
Yeah.
Which was, I can't wait to get to that one somewhere in seasons, whatever, 5, 7, 8, 10, whatever. But I will tell you a story Mel Brooks told, and I actually shared this little snippet on our Wilder Ride Facebook page. These guys had no problem cutting on each other and being almost, you would think by today's standards, insensitive and mean. But Mel Brooks used to always, when they'd go out to a diner, he would have Marty Feldman with him, and he would tell the waitress, he said, if he orders 2 eggs sunny side up, make sure you put it on 2 separate plates. That's the only way he'll see he's got 2 eggs. He's got to put one over here for this eye, one over here for this eye.
Yeah, he had Graves' disease.
Yeah.
It's a thyroid problem that makes your eyeballs protrude.
Yeah, but he could also make them go, misaligned. Instead of looking cross-eyed, they would actually do the whole iguana thing. And so you're like tracking things on each side of your head. And
at least he went with it.
Mel Brooks often said, if you want Marty Feldman to not know where you are, go nose to nose with him and you go out of his eye line.
Well, and he really capitalized on this because I remember him on, I don't remember if it was Love American Style or some other kind of 70s variety show that he was on.
Yeah, he was on a lot of variety shows as like because he was odd looking but he made fun of himself, so it was,
Yeah, and he was kind of the goofy guy you throw in for 5 seconds of laughter. But he really did. He capitalized on that problem.
I didn't know this. He came up with John Cleese and a lot of the other Monty Python guys in Britain. He was, it's the second city of Britain. It's a bunch of comedians who would do shows and be on the BBC shows. And he was actually in a troupe with John Cleese, one of those groups that, that you hear about, they created that was a funny little group that lasted probably a couple of years. And they did some stuff and wrote some things. So it's interesting that I didn't know he was a true, comedic performer before he became a movie star. But he was so odd-looking and funny that's what propelled him. And actually, it was his comedic writing that propelled him. And then he just got into the movies. And then this movie, made him a star.
There's no doubt about the chemistry between both Gene Wilder and Marty Feldman throughout this entire film. And as characters on screen, you get a sense that they really played well together. And I double-checked because I pulled a copy up of the script. A lot of the jokes were not made up on the set. A lot of times we hear about modern comedies, people winging it. A lot of these jokes were really well thought out ahead of time, and you couldn't deviate from the script. So I was amazed when they chose to cut things from the script or cut things from the first rough edit of the film. They chose to cut scenes. As we continue through this minute, because I want to kind of get back to this moment when we first meet Igor initially, because even Dr. Frankenstein calls him Igor. What we have here is that typical horror movie trope of thunder and lightning and the crash, and it flashes as Igor shows up. And then all of a sudden it turns into this really witty conversation, this banter about how do you pronounce each other's names.
Yeah, and one of my favorite parts of this movie, I think that banner between those two of the Frederick, why don't you go by Frederick if you're going by Frankenstein? Perfectly crafted in writing, but played perfectly between these two.
Well, what I see, and if we go to right around second 42, right after Gene Wilder goes, no, it's Frankenstein. Igor pulls back looking at him almost like he's in horror. He's you're putting me on.
What are you talking about?
He's like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, and it is such a funny expression. He just kind of looks him up and down, and that has to be the most insane thing I've ever heard.
That's Marty's go-to is, look up, look down, stick his head back. He's like a Muppet in that way. He has that. He does look like Kermit the Frog a little bit. Poor guy. I don't want to make fun of the guy for his ailment,
but it's awesome the way he does it because now it looks like he's. You would think, okay, that's the freakish looking one. We're the ones who should be looking at him the way he's looking at Dr. Frankenstein. He's like, what's wrong with you? You're putting me on. He's like,
well,
no.
Yeah, because it's semantic quibbling at this point. It's he's like, fine, if you're Frankenstein, then I'm Igor, you jerk.
And you're also Froderick instead of Frederick.
Froderick. I think in my research, I noticed that Peter Boyle and Marty Feldman had the same agent, so I wonder if that had something to do with, how this movie got made.
Well, in actuality, when Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks were initially kicking the script around, and Gene Wilder had mentioned it during the filming of Blazing Saddles, this idea, and Mel Brooks thought that was a really cool idea and wanted to work with him on it. Gene Wilder's agent, who happens to also be the same agent representing Peter Boyle and Marty Feldman, just called him and said, I want to do a picture with all three of you. Do you have anything in mind? Do you have any ideas? And Gene Wilder said, actually, I've got this idea I'm working on right now, the story of Frankenstein story with a happy ending.
Which fits the genre so well.
Well, it's kind of cool to hear that background story of how trying to make a movie happen rather than waiting for a script to be out there and then people going for it. It's almost like the agent said, "Well, what do we got? What do we want? I want to put them to work right away. I want to collect my 10% or 20% commission."
Well, this was a different time in Hollywood when an artist could just be like, "I got an idea for a picture, make it," and they just make it, and you're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, now it would be a cheesy YouTube video.
I came up with this script. It's called Young Frankenstein. Nowadays, we all roll our. Actually, it would be on Netflix, and it would be produced by MTV. Shout out to the Shanhara Chronicles, which is on Netflix, and I'm watching it right now, and I'm like, oh man, this is literally they couldn't come up with any other thing. They're just like, I'm just going to put this on Netflix. That's fine.
Awesome. Well, we're going to continue this dialogue as we move into the following minutes here. So as we start to wrap up minute number 16, Jonathan, you got anything else that you want to mention from this particular minute?
No, I'm ready to move on.
All right. You are part of Minute Impossible. Why don't you give us a second to plug your minute and your podcast you do?
Sure. We're Minute Impossible. We investigate the movie Mission Impossible from 1996, one glorious minute at a time, with my co-host Chris Ramirez. And we are right now, probably when this comes out, probably in the 40s or 50s of the movie, so probably about halfway there. You can always talk to us or comment to us on Twitter at Min Impossible, M-I-N Impossible, and you can talk to us over at our Facebook listeners group, which is the Impossible Minute Force. Other than that, yeah, we have a good time over there. We do a lot of, as I said before, a lot of bad impressions and talk about this movie. This movie, Young Frankenstein, was written really well. It's a really strong script, whereas the Mission Impossible, the first movie, is not a very strong script. So it's funny how when you talk about something that's funny like this, all my notes are serious. But when I talk about something that's serious and actiony, all my notes are goofs. So
it is what it is.
Yeah, you have to be honest. It's a garbage fire, and
I will break away from our own podcast for a moment to say I did really enjoy the way at least it was put together and edited, the first Mission Impossible. I liked more of that feel of the old television show.
Oh, sure. Yeah, but there's a lot of technical expertise in the movie. The script and the way that female characters are written is terrible. But we love the movie because it created a franchise that's lasted over 20 years.
Yeah, and they've got another one, getting ready to set to release later this year, I think.
July, yeah, Fallout.
All right, well, Walt, now where can people, if they want to get back to Young Frankenstein, where can they learn a little bit more about us?
Yeah, if you want to go to our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/thewilderride. You can also find us on iTunes, which we would really encourage you if you're enjoying what you're hearing. Go to The Wilder Ride on iTunes and give us a 5-star rating, make a quick comment just so your vote is counted, and let us know what you think.
And of course, the website is thewilderride.com, as you said, and you can find us there. We do have a listener group if you want to really get involved in the conversation, have a lot of fun, bring your insights, your thoughts. What was it like when you first saw any of these movies, including Young Frankenstein or any of the body of work of Gene Wilder, which we're slowly exploring 1 minute, one wonderful, funny, fantastic minute at a time. Well, you're going to need to come back tomorrow because we're going to continue this conversation of Igor and Frankenstein, where we're going to get this joke about you must be Igor, and we're going to get the wonderful Walk This Way comedic bit that Mel Brooks did not want to include initially, and it was such a great big hit that he used it 2 more times in 2 successive movies. So we're going to do that tomorrow, so please come on back for The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute.
And hear about Igor.
Dr.
Frederick.
Frankenstein?
Frankenstein.
Frankenstein.